First session on heart and kidney interaction, and to deliver this talk we have none other than Dr. Rajashekar Chakravarti.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My sincere thanks to Dr. Srinivas Kumar for having me here. It is a learning experience for me also. There are a lot of seniors, teachers, Dr. Sahai, everybody is here. As soon as I entered the conference hall today, I was met by Dr. B.K. Shastri. So he told me, Chakravarti, why are you here? You know, hyperacute rejection, as a nephrologist enters a cardiology forum, we reject him. Okay? So, I think the days of...
The person that reminds me also cardiologist.
Yeah. So, the days of learning only among very closed communities is over. It's high time we learn from each other different specialities, though unfortunately we have narrowed down in our practice into a single organ. There is more and more evidence now that body does not behave like that. And there is a lot of interaction between all the organs, vital or non-vital. And my next 10 or 15 minutes interaction with you would be the present understanding of what we know happens between two different organs, namely heart and kidney. Just before I start that, this is the present understanding as far as acute kidney injury is concerned. If there is a single insult which makes somebody's kidney function to drop, majority of this never goes into a full recovery. And when we say majority, it is almost none. Nobody goes to a full recovery. Majority go to a chronic element, which again becomes progressive, and there is some percentage which goes rapidly into end stage, needing renal replacement and remaining on dialytic support. This is the present understanding by the nephrology community and data which is supporting it. The next slide I am going to put up may be more relevant to cardiologists. This is a study known as the CONTRA study, where some 7,205 patients were looked at, had a single point insult on the kidney by a contrast injection. You look at this group into two groups: those who had an acute kidney injury, those who did not have an acute kidney injury. You follow up the groups at the end of 2 years, at the end of 2 years, the group which had acute renal insufficiency, the mortality is significantly more different compared to the group which did not have an acute kidney injury. And this is when everything else is balanced out. What this tells is what we now call as a delta creatinine. Small changes in serum creatinine, when they occur in a hospital setting, for whatever the reason the patient may be in the hospital. He may be in to see a cardiologist, he may be in to see a gynecologist or an orthopedic surgeon. But if his kidney function has changed a little, that affects him not only then, 7 days hospitalization, 1 month, 1 year, even 2 years down the line. And this group behaves differently once they have had an acute kidney injury. What this tells us is, and the present acceptance is, acute kidney injury is no longer a single organ disease. It is a systemic disease. Once there is a AKI, there is systemic changes inside the body. So with that understanding, I would like to just introduce, we commonly come across in our day-to-day practice patients coming into the hospital for a cardiac problem but get to be seen by a nephrologist. Patient coming in for a nephrological problem get to be seen by a cardiologist. This is one such patient, 63-year-old, who had dilated cardiomyopathy and was coming back to the hospital every month or every 3 months with severe heart failure. Got into the ICU, got some inotropes, diuretics, bumped up his creatinines, got better and used to get discharged again and again. So what do we call such a patient? The present nomenclature, we give it as cardiorenal syndrome. And the ADQI has given some classification and some pathophysiology in each of these classified cardiorenal syndromes. So generally we look at a patient with kidney disease, we were all taught, is more prone for heart disease. If you look at in the general population incidence of coronary vascular disease, once you say somebody has a CKD, you have a significantly increased incidence of CAD. So much so, present understanding is that CKD is equivalent to CAD, just like diabetes is equivalent to CAD. And if you look at in CKD, as the GFR falls, the incidence of cardiovascular events increases. So there is a link between the two. And once you reach a dialysis stage, you have 44 times more incidence of coronary vascular disease in this group. This is true even if you plan peritoneal dialysis or somebody goes for a transplantation also. So this is data which says as the GFR falls, depending on which stage of CKD, your number of CV related events increase for every 100 patients. So if I have to define cardiorenal syndrome, the initial thinking was a relatively normal kidney becomes dysfunctional because of a diseased heart, assuming that if there is a healthy heart, the same kidney becomes functional. This is when nephrologists were blaming everything on cardiologists. The present understanding is cardiorenal syndrome is a pathophysiological disorder of the heart and kidneys in which acute or chronic dysfunction of one organ induces acute or chronic dysfunction of the other organ. Okay? And you see somebody has a heart disease, they have hemodynamic disturbances, but more importantly, there is a neurohormonal activation and the inflammatory cascade which gets initiated. The kidney gets affected because of this neurohormonal activation and inflammatory cascade, which are prolonged and sustained over the next many years to come. Similarly, you get a kidney disease, there is a lot of things that happens in the vasculature, including accelerated atherosclerosis, arteriosclerosis, endothelial dysfunction, uremia related syndromes, anemia being a major component here, which affect the heart. So one organ affects the other. The major change in understanding this topic has been of late some proof that inflammation is one of the main reasons why the other organ gets affected. You have disease of one organ, body goes through a state of inflammation, the other organs also get involved, and then they go through a chronic damage. So there is crosstalk between organs, there is inflammation, which is the reason why you get other organs in the body being affected. These inflammatory mediators together are now grouped as myocardial depressant factors, and some of them are named interleukin 1, 6 and TNF alpha. And when we talk of organ dysfunction, we are not talking just one or two organs. Once there is inflammation and these mediators are in circulation, you get a cardiac disease, you get a renal, you get even a bone marrow suppression, which again leads to a cascading effect of this organ dysfunction, multi-organ dysfunction. So just to look at the types, there are 5 types. Type 1 is characterized by rapid worsening of cardiac function leading to acute kidney injury. This is subclassified into 4 types. Acute heart failure may be because of hypertensive pulmonary edema, or it is acute decompensated of a chronic heart failure, cardiogenic shock, or predominant right heart failure. Irrespective of which one happens, what actually happens initially, there is a decrease in cardiac output. You get a hemodynamically decreased perfusion to the kidney, therefore the kidney goes into a shutdown. Common, all of us see it, acute kidney injury. If you are giving some agents like diuretics, ACE inhibitors, contrast media, that also participates in damaging the kidney and dropping the. But the present understanding, apart from all this, there is an element, even if it lasts for 24 hours, there is a humoral element to it, and inflammation starts. Prolonged, the inflammation damages the kidney and leads to chronicity also to develop. Type 2 this is probably the commonest that you and I will see. You have a chronic congestive heart failure, kidney goes through a progressive disease leading to, at some point in time, end stage kidney disease. So you have heart failure, starts with a normal kidney, again because of various reasons, though initially they are hemodynamic factors, you always get an element of inflammation, fibrosis in the kidney leading to ESRD. Type 3 is renocardiac acute syndrome. You get an acute renal failure, maybe because of acute glomerulonephritis. Again, not uncommon, all of us have seen. Somebody comes with acute glomerulonephritis with heart failure. So there is acute renal failure causing either a heart failure or arrhythmic heart failure. So here you get acute kidney injury, initially decrease in GFR, salt and water retention, volume expansion, preload increases, significant hypertension, sympathetic activation, RAS activation. Subsequently, as it gets prolonged, there is an element of inflammation, again leading to inflammatory damage of the heart. Type 4, this is what we initially talked of. CKD, with each progressing drop in GFR, you get more and more incidence of coronary arterial disease. As you go down the stages of CKD, here it is again because of anemia, which is one of the major uremic toxins. Anemia leads to eccentric changes in the heart, whereas volume overload also can be part of this. So you have a volume overload and anemia, both of them causing cardiomyopathy. And we know significantly the other organs which are affected, including bone marrow, have a role in this. Type 5 is you have a systemic condition like a septicemia, where you can get both renal injury and also cardiac injury. So if you look at therapy per se, there are many options, and most of the time these patients are exposed to a lot of diuretics. But then the present understanding, we have what is known as a KDIGO guidelines. KDIGO guidelines for the first time have given, if possible, in an acute situation, avoid diuretics. It's not as simple as said, you can't avoid diuretics when somebody is in heart failure. But the understanding is, as you use more and more diuretics, the insult on the kidney also increases. So what are the other options? Apart from diuretics, which are useful in getting rid of salt and water, therefore symptomatic improvement in the patients, you have options which include pharmacological therapies and also non-pharmacological therapies. Among the non-pharmacological therapies, you have some interest in ultrafiltration at this point in time. So what is the limitation of using a loop diuretic? You do eliminate some amount of volume, but then it leads to dyselectrolytemia, depending on the dose you give and also how long you give. Diuretic resistance is a problem. Once you start using, you do cause some amount of secondary distal, in the distal tubule, you get a higher and higher amounts of aldosterone, which makes again avid sodium reabsorption. Electrolyte abnormalities, I already told you. Every diuretic you use causes fresh drop in GFR. There is no diuretic which is safe. There was some data about nisiretide, that it is safe and it doesn't cause new onset renal failure, but it is gone out of popularity, I think because of its hepatic toxicity. So diuretics themselves cause further RAS activation, sympathetic activation, which is one of the culprits when you look at a cardiorenal syndrome. Apart from all this, they can cause hearing loss, they can cause interstitial nephritis and also bone loss. So this is a single dose of diuretic causes drop in GFR. I just wanted to. If you look at the data per se, we have now at least 3 randomized trials in which extracorporeal ultrafiltration helped. And keeping this data in mind, what we did was we tried to put some of our patients on ultrafiltration and then did pre and post ultrafiltration values of the myocardial depressant factors. We could do this in around 14 patients, and what we found was BNP, TNF alpha, interleukin 1 and 6. The pre-ultrafiltration and 4 weeks post-ultrafiltration, there was a significant fall from thousands to in tens digits. In some of them it was not detectable. This is from our own lab. So I just wanted to convey a message. The present understanding is there is a lot of inflammation going on. You have inflammatory mediators circulating in the body which are causing the other organ dysfunction, and they also continue to keep this vicious cycle going on. Heart failure leads to kidney failure. Kidney failure leads to more of heart failure. And this carries on. To some extent, all of us should be looking at in future some anti-inflammatory therapies. At this point in time, to my knowledge, only ultrafiltration is capable of removing these from the body, thereby reducing the number of recurrent hospitalizations, need for diuretic dosage, higher dosages, and then the outcomes improving. Biomarkers is another thing which I didn't have time to go through. Biomarkers are coming in a big way as far as the kidney is concerned. You have biomarkers for heart, kidney biomarkers like KIM, that is kidney injury molecule 1, NGAL. At present NGAL is available in our country and we are able to use it at this point in time. NGAL is a better predictor of rehospitalization mortality in heart failure than even BNP is. That is what the GALANT trial tells us recently, which is published. So with that understanding, I just want to conclude. Independent of renal functions, ultrafiltration has a role in these people, and you should start looking at interactions between many organs. Though I mentioned here only heart and the kidney, similar things happen in the brain, similar things happen in the liver, and there is data, strong data to support it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
If there are no questions from audience, how accessible is this ultrafiltration in let us say, district hospitals?
Actually, some of the data that I had was on peritoneal route of ultrafiltration, whereas all the three trials, Rapid CHF, Unload and Euphoria, they talked of ultrafiltration through the regular hemodialysis route. So if you have a unit where there is a hemodialysis facility, anybody can offer ultrafiltration. Every hemodialysis machine today comes with a mode known as isolated UF. You don't have to dialyze these patients. You just put them on isolated UF. You can do ultrafiltration. In ultrafiltration, you are removing salt and water. You are not removing selectively water or selectively salt. So when you remove salt and water together, you are maintaining their electrolyte. They will never go into a electrolyte disturbance. That is one. So any unit which has access to hemodialysis, the same machine can be used. I was trying to put, if I had time, peritoneal route of ultrafiltration, which to my mind is more physiological. When we started putting on hemo route of ultrafiltration, after some time, these patients start behaving like those who are having renal failure. What happens is they do drop their GFR slowly and they need more and more of this. Initially we start only one session in 2 weeks, then we have to do one session in 10 days, then one session in a week. So that has been my problem when I do ultrafiltration to the hemo route. In peritoneal route, you can do one exchange of peritoneal dialysis for a liter of ultrafiltration per day. With time, you don't need every day. You can do once in 3 days, once in a week. We have patients now who have moved from daily to once a week ultrafiltration. So it is accessible to any good unit, even in a district hospital. Only thing is some initial 1 week training is necessary.
In the cases of post-angiotherapy or post-contrast nephropathy or renal impairment, there are some agents like N-acetylcysteine and toluene being discussed. What is the evidence and what should be done to counter these agents?
Okay. I did briefly mention about KDIGO guidelines. My suggestion would be for every one of us who does see some amount of cardiac and renal work to read them. KDIGO guidelines for the first time has clearly given no role for low-dose dopamine, no role for N-acetylcysteine, and every other myth which is there. They have clearly given evidence for and against and have recommended what is to be used and what not to be used. We do continue to use N-acetylcysteine mainly because we know it does not do any harm. But at this point in time, even meta-analysis done on major studies does not show a benefit or a risk of using it. So we do use it. The only thing that helps in contrast is hydration and of course the volume of contrast. So,
Cost of PD and HD?
there is some analysis available from couple of units about recurrent hospitalization with heart failure and going on ultrafiltration. There is no comparison. Each hospitalization is because they get into ICU. Each time, if you have seen a CHF patient, each time they come back, they come very sick, hypotensive, get into ICU, get better in a week's time, get out of ICU, go to the ward and then go. So it is much, much cheaper compared to a recurrent hospitalization.
Is it ultrafiltration cost effective?
There is cost analysis also available. Among the 3 trials I mentioned, Unload has the maximum numbers wise, and it is cost effective mainly because the recurrent hospitalization, in fact I have data in our patients, 54 of our patients. From 2009 onwards we have been offering this to some of our patients who come with congestive heart failure, recurrent admissions. The hospital admissions go down significantly.
Sometimes heart failure patients with hypotension, when they are in renal failure, it is the only ultrafiltration that we have the choice. Hemodialysis cannot be.
Hemodialysis is indicated if somebody has azotemia and acidosis.
But if the patient is in shock state,
In shock state, there are different types of hemodialysis available now, sir. There is something called SLED. We do. The same machine can be used, or you have a SLED machine. The way it changes your BP is much less. So there are different modalities of dialysis available for patients who have got low blood pressure. But if they are periphery also, it's the same hemodialysis machine. Anybody who is used to a hemodialysis can do that.
Thank you very much.